Welcome to another episode of the Providence Friarcast, presented by PCBB1917.com, your home for Providence College basketball news, notes, and opinions. Now here's the founder of PCBB1917.com and your host, Mike Hopkins.
All right, we're back here for an exam break week on the podcast. This is a little breather in between the Providence's last game against UMass and their next game against Stony Brook. The players are all in the midst of taking finals at the moment. I'm joined here again by Brendan McGarr and Chris Grenham. I think we all feel pretty confident that we did pretty well on our midterms, but we'll see. We'll see what people think of the Friars. Coming off a 1-1 week, I think, since the last time we did a podcast, needing overtime to beat Brown, and then obviously losing their last time out on the road at UMass. We'll talk about all that. We'll talk about a little bit about Stony Brook going forward, and then kind of just a lot of general talk about Providence and what's been going on through the first 10 games. Brendan, why don't we start with you? Let's get your impressions from last week in terms of the Brown game, the UMass game, kind of what you think this team is looking like right now through 10 games.
Honestly, Mike, I mean, if you were to go back to the beginning of the season, you look at the schedule and you're saying, okay, that's a win, that's a loss, that's a loss, that's a win. I think that the Friars are right there, with one exception of obviously being the UMass game. And even then, you have to look into the circumstances going into that game where you had a Kyron Cartwright who was clearly not 100%. You didn't have your starting off guard in Alpha Diallo and maybe your most dynamic offensive player off the bench in Maliek White. You know, with 3 losses at this point, you know, one of them coming against an Elite 8 caliber team, I think, against Minnesota, and then, you know, going down to the Ryan Center and, you know, URI finally getting that monkey off the back and beating the Friars. You know, I think this team is right where it is, or maybe I expected it to be, with obviously the exception of the UMass game, maybe. I think what most people are, you know, in panic mode about is the close wins against the Belmonts, the Browns, and the Riders. Those are the games that have the people the most concerned as, you know, we get through the main crux of the non-conference schedule with 3 games left to go before opening at St. John's a few days after Christmas.
Yeah, I think it's probably the nature of the wins, like you said, that has people close to that edge, but there's really no need to be there. I mean, the UMass loss is bad, but, you know, injuries fueled that one, so you can get over that. URI and Minnesota are games that before the season started, you could have assumed that this team might lose. And 7-3 is not horrible. You know, this is a huge week. Brett and I were talking before that this might be one of the biggest weeks of the season so far, just kind of defining this team and seeing what they can do, how they can adjust injuries, because doesn't sound like Maliek White's going to be back for a while. Alpha Diallo might not be back before St. John's. Hopefully, you know, maybe you could get him back in some form against Houston, but I'm not really sure. But yeah, you know, 7-3 with the injuries that they've had, it really is not horrible. It's fine. I'm not sure what people were really expecting out of this team, but, you know, granted, I get the nature of the wins. Some of these close wins against Belmont and Ryder and Brown and stuff could shake people up, but they'll be fine. Just step away from the ledge. They'll be okay.
In terms of the injuries, I think it sounds like Cartwright is still dealing with a little bit of a tender ankle, so I think they would love to stay away from him, even maybe against Stony Brook, give him like a full, you know, 7 days or so off to really get healthy, because it's clear that he's not, and they really need him to be, because he just has not been looking like himself the last few games, and if they don't, Micaiah Langford has played okay, I think, the last few games. But he's a freshman, and he's just going to have ups and downs. I don't know that they can rely on him, per se, certainly not at this point in the season, as much as Cartwright is really the catalyst of the offense in many ways. So Cartwright dealing with a sore ankle, but I think not a huge deal. It's just one of those nicks that happens during a basketball season, but I think they'd love to get him healthy before Houston, certainly, and when Big East play comes. Diallo also seems like it's not going to be a huge deal. It doesn't sound, Cooley said during his radio show Tuesday night, he doesn't think that Diallo or White will play on Sunday against Stony Brook. But it sounds like he's going to eventually be back for at the worst St. John's. So you're going to have him for the whole Big East slate, possibly against Houston, like you mentioned. White, though, it sounds like it's going to be weeks. I think we've all kind of heard the rumors. I saw some people on Twitter, 6 to 8 weeks. I mean, various rumors right after the fact about a broken leg. Doesn't sound like that's accurate because it does sound like it's his knee. He's been wearing a brace on his knee, still on crutches. Diallo a little bit less on the crutches, according to Cooley during the radio show. I think that's positive. But in terms of the injuries, Chris, I don't know what you would look at in terms of a reasonable timeline for people to not panic about these guys getting back.
Yeah, I think you made a good point about Kyron. It'd be nice if they could get him a full week off because clearly he's been pretty banged up for a while now, maybe since late November. You're going back towards like BC and Ryder. He hasn't really been himself. He's been pretty banged up. And it was unfortunate that they had to turn to him against Brown. You know, ideally, PC wins that game by double digits and you don't even have to bring him in at all. And it's really, they shouldn't have had to, that this team shouldn't need him against Brown. But Brown, to be fair, came out, kind of shot the lights out, and they had to turn to Cartwright. So that kind of stunk. But yeah, I agree with you. If they can give him a week, that would be great. But I think realistically, this team, besides maybe Houston, they can get through the rest of this non-conference schedule without those three guys. And if you can go in with a healthy Kyron and a healthy Alpha into St. John's, that would be the ideal scenario. It's just having those two guys back in full strength for Big East play because that's really the focus here.
Yeah, I think the focus obviously got to get everybody healthy, and I think people kind of forget that UMass is not the Sisters of the Poor. They have a new coach. They still have some good players. Pipkin's a good player. He shouldn't have been able to do everything he did in the last game, scoring 30 points and pretty much getting to the rim whenever he wanted. He shouldn't be able to do that. But I mean, he's not a bum. He's a good player. He's an experienced player. But UMass is going to be like a middle of the road team. They're around the 150 range in Ken Palm right now. So they're not the Sisters of the Poor, but they're not. They should. Providence was favored in the game, even with the injuries, and they should have won the game. I don't think that's unfair to say. If they had made some free throws down the stretch, who knows? Maybe they would have won the game. But the next couple opponents, Stony Brook picked to finish 4th in the America East. Not a great year for the America East overall. They are, I think, in the 230s somewhere right now. So. I mean, obviously Houston's going to be tough. But it's a neutral game where Providence will have a lot of the home court advantage. So they should be able to get through this. And I think a 4th loss, it'd be really bad if it comes on Sunday. But if it happens to come on a neutral floor against Houston, I mean, it's not good. But I think
wouldn't be the end of the world.
Yeah, but it's tough because the Big East this year just looks like a total bear. And Cooley's best record in this current Big East is 11 wins, so they would probably need 11 with 4 losses just to have the appropriate resume to get an at-large bid. But Brendan, what is your thought on the remaining schedule and how they can get through it with the injuries?
Honestly, Mike and Chris, I think this might be the most important week of the season coming up. 3 games before the Christmas holiday. Sunday afternoon, Stony Brook. You mentioned the neutral site game against Houston, and then closing out 2 days before Christmas at home at the Dunk against Sacred Heart. I think, Ed Cooley has keeps saying, and he said it last night after he was on his radio show, that this team still hasn't found his identity yet, and that has to be a little bit concerning. 10 games into the season, granted injuries and still maybe adjusting to not having Emmett Holt, that plays a part in it, but you're still dealing with a couple seniors. Or 3 seniors, and Jalen Lindsay, Rodney Bullock, and Kyron Cartwright, who have been around the block per se. They understand, what it takes to get ready for Big East play. So that's a little bit concerning to me, but I think this is a big week in terms of maybe laying the foundation in terms of what kind of team might we see going to Big East play. But there's also an asterisk, too, because we might not see the complete team. We mentioned, maybe Kyron Cartwright held out on Sunday against Stony Brook. We probably won't see Alpha Diallo or Maliek White. So it's almost like we're still reserving judgment a little bit. But but that also opens the door for other guys too to step up. I thought Isaiah Jackson and Drew Edwards gave great minutes off the bench the other day against UMass, and I was a little bit puzzled, especially in the second half, when Isaiah Jackson, I think, only played 2 minutes after playing, I think, maybe 7 points in the first half. I was surprised that Cooley stayed away from him for as long as he did in the second half. So, it's kind of like Cooley said last night. It's next man up, and it's an opportunity for guys like Isaiah and Drew to come in and maybe hold down the fort as guys get healthy.
Yeah, Brendan, you talk about laying the foundation, and we talked about it a little bit before. Do you think that involves maybe throwing Nate Watson in the starting lineup? And Mike, this goes to you too, but I know a lot of people have pushed about that, and neither guy has been great on the block per se, but do you think it's time to maybe flop those two and give Watson a chance in the starting lineup?
I think so. I think Khalif Young. I think you went with him early in the year because he is the veteran. He's better on the block at once. But I thought Nate Watson, gave great energy and a little bit of burst in the second half, especially in the UMass game. I think it might be time to go with him extensively because the one thing I don't like this team when they have Rodney Bullock at the 5, I'm not a fan of that look. I know it's the small ball mantra now. It's positionless basketball, and but you need a big out there. And I especially noticed this the other day when Pipkins was having his way and beating the Friars perimeter guys off the dribble. There was no real last line of defense there, and Rodney Bullock should not be viewed as your last line defense. It should be a guy that size of either Nate Watson or Khalif Young. I think right now Nate Watson is far more polished offensively than Khalif Young, so that's why I would be more inclined to go with him in a starting role and have Khalif come off the bench.
I think there's a common rumbling I've been hearing, just reading things and talking to people, is that they think that a lot of the issues right now are that Cooley is not playing the right players or not the right lineups, or he's sticking with someone too long, or like Brendan was saying, Jackson plays well in the first half, you don't see him in the second half. I think that's been sort of an underlying problem for Cooley the last several years, but it's been different because he's only had 6 or 7 guys, maybe 8, that you would go with. Now that there's 10 or so guys who potentially could all play when everyone's healthy, it's a little bit more. There's more to choose from in terms of the guys who should be playing, in terms of what people's opinions would be. I think Watson in the starting lineup makes sense as something to shake things up coming out of the exam break. I think you could go a lot of different ways, but I agree that I think some of the propensity for Cooley to just rely on Bullock and these smaller lineups, I just don't know that's and Stony Brook, just to look specifically at them, they're pretty much, they have 2 guards who are 5'11" and 6 foot, and then after that they just play guys who are 6'5" to 6'7". They have one really big guy who doesn't really play a lot, who's 6'11". Besides that, they're pretty small. So people have been arguing, should Providence, being the better team in all these games, should they be the team to play to tailor their lineup for their opponent, or should they be imposing their will and forcing the other team to try to comply with their lineup? And I think that'd be interesting to see what happens on Sunday, because it's a clear size advantage inside, no matter who's playing the center, whether it's Watson or Young. And so maybe that's, and we've talked about it. I know, Brendan, you wrote about this a week or 2 ago, that the potential for even playing Watson and Young together in the backcourt. I'm not sure that we're going to see that, just because, I don't know that they add up to one really good player at the 4-5 right now, especially on defense. But I think you certainly should see the ball go inside more, I think, on Sunday, because they have a clear advantage. And between that and potentially having some different lineups available, maybe playing different guys, Cooley just needs to, I think, get a little better at figuring out who's playing well and not just defaulting back at halftime to coming out of the locker room with the starting 5, or, I normally play this guy or this unit for the first 5 to 7 minutes, and we sub, or he's got to be a little more flexible, I think. But part of it, I think, is he has to figure it out first. He needs to figure out who the people are that should be going in the particular places, and I mean, Jackson's been a good example of that, because he has had a little bit of Jekyll and Hyde in terms of how he's played, but also his minutes have sort of been Jekyll and Hyde. He played very well. I mean, and you look at, he played pretty well against Brown too, until that last 45 seconds when he had those really stupid fouls that sent him into overtime. But besides that, he played pretty well. He played well in the first half against UMass. A guy like Drew Edwards coming in off the bench, playing a little defense. I mean, it's got to be hard for some of these guys like Jackson and Edwards and part of it is that White's been out, so that there's sort of there's that aspect as well. Everyone's in a different place kind of because of that, and Diallo too. But I think Cooley's issue right now, I think largest issue heading into the last few games of non-conference play, is he's got to figure out what these lineups are going to look like in terms of, are we going to go big, are we going to go small, and then who are the guys that he wants to ride with, and who are the guys he trusts, and he's got to just implement that, because right now, I mean, it's kind of perplexing sometimes. I mean, to see, and he had that quote after the Brown game, our identity is in shambles, and part of that's on him. I mean, it's not fair to blame all of it on him, because I think part of it is the Emmett Holt issue. But, I mean, we're 10 games into the season now. Big East play will be here, basically 2 weeks from today. So something has to give, and it would be nice, I think, it would make Friar fans feel a lot better if they figured it out on Sunday instead of maybe a lackluster performance heading to Mohegan Sun against Houston, who's a pretty solid team.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, you pointed out playing against a smaller lineup against Stony Brook, and Brown wasn't the biggest lineup either, and we still kind of showed the inability to get the ball inside, at least in the first half. I think Brown outscored PC in the paint like 16-10, 17-10, something like that, and that shouldn't be happening. It's I guess it comes back to the question of, do you impose your will on another team, or do you flow with their lineups? And against a team like Brown or Stony Brook, Providence is the team that should be setting the tone there, but clearly they're not doing that. And it goes back to everything you were just asking. If it's, who's playing when, and just kind of finding who he wants to ride with against certain teams. So it'll be interesting to watch in terms of, I've kind of been fascinated with the Providence front court so far this year. So against a smaller lineup like Stony Brook, I think it'll be interesting to keep an eye out, because they weren't great against Brown, who was a small lineup, and, they were again pretty average against UMass, but another small lineup like Stony Brook will be interested to keep an eye out for that.
Actually, guys, I just came up with a good stat. This is the first game that in Ed Cooley's career, that in PC career, I should say, that the Friars have lost right before the exam break. So they've always had a pretty good track record in those games right before the exam break. So I think that's a different, maybe a different variable that they haven't dealt with before a little bit, having that loss, and then maybe it hangs around a little bit longer than all the other ones because you're dealing with the exam break as well. And I think that's also led to some panic in the streets. But there is a track record in this area where maybe he's going to shorten the rotation. You look at last year, Ryan Fazekas, he wasn't really a factor maybe midway through the Big East season to the end. Ricky Council, I think Ed Cooley couldn't even be bothered with somebody like that one. And there is a history in this area. I think maybe you need to start seeing it sooner rather than later, and that's why I think this week will be pretty telling in terms of rotations and everything. But like we said, the light will be left on because you don't have an Alpha Diallo, you don't have a Maliek White, and you're going to have a still limited Kyron Cartwright.
Yeah, this is where the upperclassmen really got to step up. Guys like Jalen and Kyron and Rodney, this is where they really make their due. Especially, like you said, there's a loss hanging around over the exam week, and that's important, where those guys got to step up and kind of, set the tone for some of the younger guys and lead the way through this week heading into Sunday against Stony Brook, because they're, without guys like Alpha in there, they've really got to set the tone. So this is an important week, not only for the team, but for those three upperclassmen to kind of lead the charge here.
Looking ahead specifically to Stony Brook, they're 4-7 on the year. They just lost to Hofstra in their last time out in a pretty tight game played in the 80s. Coach is Jeff Bowles in his second year at the helm of the program. They're picked to finish fourth, as I mentioned, in the America East. Their leading scorer is a redshirt sophomore. His name is Akwazi Yeboah. So shout out to John Rook. You'll have to figure that one out. From the UK, he's averaging 13.2 points a game. And they have, the leading rebounder, senior Tyrell Sturdivant, 4.6 rebounds a game. One of the better rebounders in Stony Brook history, actually. Also, guy to keep an eye on is a junior college transfer, Jerron Cornish. Coming on of late, he scored 22 points last time out, 18 in the second half. He now has 4 games in a row in double figures after entering the starting lineup 2 games ago. But as I mentioned, aside from Cornish, who's 5'11", and they have another guard, UC Iregbu, who is 6 foot. Everybody else is 6'5" to 6'7", including Cornish, including Sturdivant. So interesting to see how the lineups rotate in that game. Game tips at 2:30 at the Dunk, kind of a weird time. The Patriots are playing, is that right?
4:25.
So that could be a factor on the crowd, especially because it's Stony Brook to begin with. Ed Cooley on his radio show Tuesday night said that this game is more about Providence growing as a team than anything Stony Brook does, but I'm not sure that they're in a position to lose any more non-conference games, so they kind of have to figure it out between now and December 28th. So Stony Brook, I don't know if anybody has anything specific on Stony Brook, but I have a stat. This
you
will
do.
make everyone, this will make everyone very happy to hear. Providence this season is better at free throw shooting than Stony Brook. So, I mean, that is just phenomenal news for the Friars. Stony Brook.
Probably the last time we'll hear that all year.
It could be. 65% from the line. That is 313th nationally. Providence, 66.8%, 271st nationally. But Ed Cooley kind of talked about the free throw shooting, because he was asked about it on the radio show, and I think he kind of lumped in the free throw shooting with the mental toughness, with the lack thereof, and what he called his team soft after their game at UMass, and what he kind of expounded on what he meant by soft. He didn't necessarily mean just physically soft. He meant they're a little mentally soft right now. The mental toughness, you got to make free throws at the end of the game. That's just part of mental toughness. You gotta make sure you're playing defense with focus, and so that was something he mentioned. The free throw shooting is more of a mental toughness issue because they do practice it. So it's not. I don't think it's as much of a physical. I mean, maybe for a guy like Khalif Young, who's not the best free throw shooter, but I mean, Makayesh and Langford, I think he's Mr. 1 for 2. I mean, every single time he goes 1 for 2. So and Cartwright hasn't been great either, and he's a pretty good free throw shooter for his career. I think he's in the 80s. So free throw shooting, interesting stat there. Providence has the advantage. Also, Stony Brook sends their opponents to the line a lot, so maybe this is a game they rebound on that front.
There's no reason for us not to get to the line. I mean, Stony Brook is horrendous in most defensive facets, so if we can get to the line and hopefully improve our percentage there, that'd be nice.
One thing I'll say about Stony Brook, they played UConn. I think one of the early games this year, they were actually up at the half against UConn. Now, granted, UConn has struggled against the Little Sisters before the whole year, it seems like, but they get some guys. Stony Brook to knock down some shots from distance. So obviously, I'm sure guarding the 3-point line will be a point of emphasis, regardless whether Ed Cooley says this game is more about the Friars than facing Stony Brook. But you still have to be conscious of your opponent and do your homework, and that's the one thing that kind of sticks out. The Stony Brook team, can put some shooters on the floor.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. And the Cornish kid was a pretty big time scorer at Broward in Florida, which is one of the better JUCO programs.
Yeah,
and he's sort of been coming on. He missed the first couple games. He's only played, I think, 7 games of the 11, but he started the last 2, and he was very good in the second half, as I mentioned against Hofstra last time out. So, I mean, there are some players to be concerned with, and as we saw against UMass, a guard who can score the ball has been causing problems for Providence. And I think part of that is not totally on Makayesh and Langford, and it's not totally. I mean, Cartwright's ankle is sore, but I think Alpha Diallo missing on that front is very important because he is their stopper. I think. I mean, Lindsay too, but I think Diallo is more physical, and I think he would have handled Pipkins a little bit more on Saturday. And I mean, if they needed to, if he was just getting to the rim like he was, I think they could have put Diallo on him and stemmed that tide. And I think Maliek White's offense off the bench has also been missing too. I mean, he had been really a big spark in the last several games before he got hurt. So, I mean, those two certainly are missed in these kinds of games because you come out on a Sunday at 2:30. It's a little flat in the Dunk. There's nobody there. Maybe, and Stony Brook has been getting off to fast starts, so people should take note of that. That let's say it's 10-2 at the first media timeout, and their Providence is down 8. Ed Cooley could maybe go to Maliek White and come in and bang a 3 and get some energy going. Diallo could be getting some stops, getting them out in transition, and that's just not there. So the other guys just have to step up. I mean, that's really the bottom line. and I think everybody knows that. It's next man up. That's just how it has to be. You get plenty of talented players on this roster, and they just need to figure it out. And hopefully, Stony Brook is an opponent that they can figure it out and still win. And then you hopefully get some reinforcements back for Houston at Mohegan Sun, which I think will be very fun. I will be there at Mohegan Sun, and looking forward to getting up there a little bit early and maybe checking out the blackjack tables. We'll see what happens.
You get St. John's first, though, Mike.
St. John's, yeah, come on.
That's right. Well, I can follow it on my phone while I'm
yeah,
playing
that's probably a good move. Who do
blackjack.
and they play St. Joe's from Philly, right?
St. Joe's, yes.
Yeah.
Which is weird. It's a weird doubleheader time. It's like a 4:30 game, I believe. You thought maybe like a 7 and a 9 o'clock card, but I guess I think it's on ESPNU, if I'm correct. But so that's once again, TV rules the world. But the one thing that I'm looking for, guys, is we go to this last stretch of non-conference games. Is this team has to understand that they're going to get everybody's best shot. A program that's won has been to 4 straight NCAA tournaments is kind of like people understand that they know and they're going to be coming after them. And I don't think that they've kind of really grasped that concept yet. I don't know if they still think they're like a little bit underdogish to a degree, and they're like flying under the radar. I mean, those days maybe are over, at least for now. They have to understand that they're going to get everybody's best shot, and they certainly got it in the Brown game. They got it in UMass, and and even it's the URI game that doesn't need much explanation as a rivalry game. But they have to understand that to fight fire with fire. And I think sometimes this PC team has like eased into games, and you can't ease into a street fight because we saw what happened, especially in the first half against UMass when you get down by double digits and fighting back like that. Granted they did fight back, but they didn't have enough left in the tank to finish. So I think getting off to a better start, I'm sure that's being stressed this week too, and understanding that regardless of teams' records, they're going to come right after them.
Yeah, and Mike pointed out before, Stony Brook loves to come out to a hot start and kind of jump all over teams. And you hit the nail on the head. These teams towards the end of the schedule here, towards the end of the non-conference schedule, this is like their last big game. After Providence, Stony Brook's best opponent is maybe UVM. I know they play Rutgers, but it's probably UVM. So they're going to come at PC with all they have if they're going to try and grab another big non-conference win. That's what they're looking for, similar to Brown and similar to Ryder and all these other teams. So I think they really have to realize that at some point, and they can't just lay flat in the first 10 minutes against a team like this, because this is a huge game for them coming into Providence, and they need it. So I think that's a really good point.
I also think too, Jalen Lindsey, he needs to shoot the ball more, and now he's not a creator. I mean, he's not going to create his own shots. I would love to see them set more screens for him. I think his season high is 9 in terms of the number of shots he's taken in a game. I mean, he's shooting a ridiculous clip from 3. He's shooting a ridiculous clip from 3. I mean, you got to ride that hot hand. I feel they go to him and then they just stay away from him for long stretches. Like we said, I think the only time I can only remember him like putting the ball in the dribble is when he hit that shot against URI last year, where it was kind of like one of those G's moments, and then he kind of bailed everybody out at the last second. But he's not a guy that's going to put the ball on the deck. He needs help to maybe get open, kind of maybe like a Fazekas, but not extreme. I always thought that Ryan Fazekas needed like 3 screens in order before he can get open. I think with Jalen, maybe you got to set a hard screen, maybe free him up and let him go. But I think that has to be maybe a focal point going forward, because you need scoring punch, and that's a direct tie into maybe increasing his production.
Yeah, if you could run more screens for Jalen, that would be so ideal, because a lot of times I feel like they're pretty reliant on him finding an opening in transition. So, they're driving and kicking out to him, and that's great, and it works a lot, and he's open a lot in transition because he's sitting in the corner or sitting on the wing. But if you could run in a half-court set, run some screens off him, it would just make a lot more sense, because, the guy's shooting close to 54% from 3. You got to get the guy more shots, and you can't rely on him finding an opening in transition, because he's not going to put the ball on the floor and create for himself. That's just not his game. And so, yeah, if you could find screens in the half-court offense, it would open up a whole other world of contributions for this offense.
And that goes back to maybe production from the two bigs, Watson and Khalifa.
Exactly. Yeah.
That department.
Well, they're certainly going to need all the help they can get without Diallo and White and a banged up Cartwright. But next time out will be Sunday. We will see you guys next week for the to recap. Hopefully a easy Friar victory for everyone's sake in Providence right now. I know everyone's getting ready for the holidays. Hanukkah is here. Christmas will be here before we know it. So I think everybody hopefully will be back with to talk about some progress and a Providence win.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but I gotta go back to the library. You got a couple more midterms.
A couple more finals.
I gotta plow through. So we'll see everybody. Well, I'll definitely see you, Chris, Sunday at Doug, and then Mike, we'll definitely see you at
the blackjack tables. We'll see each other at the blackjack tables. Yeah.
We'll see you at the blackjack.
Maybe we should record a podcast from the blackjack table.
Live from the casino.
live from Uncasville.
That'd be great.
All right, that was episode 4 of the Providence Friarcast. Thanks for joining us again for another episode. 10 games into the Friar season. Brendan, Chris, and I broke it down a little bit there. Some of the things that we thought Ed Cooley needs to improve on. And we previewed a little bit of the Stony Brook game. Looked ahead a little bit to maybe some blackjack at Mohegan Sun next week. But we'll talk next week. We'll have another podcast out before that Houston game at Mohegan Sun. Make sure you head to iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe, rate, review. We've gotten some good ratings so far, so keep those up. It really helps us to grow the podcast, find more people to listen, which is always good. Shout out here to some of my patrons. A little plug for the Patreon, patreon.com/PCBB1917. For as little as $3, you get access to our Slack chat community, where we talk all kinds of things. And for $5 a month, you get access to a special recruiting channel on the Slack community. For $10 a month, you get your name shouted out in a podcast and more. My patrons have a little surprise coming their way, as I mentioned last week in the end of the episode. Some of the people also who did the surprise PCBB hashtag may also have a little surprise coming their way, so everyone there should keep their eyes on their Twitter feed for me to reach out to them possibly for a little Christmas surprise. You can head over there. It's patreon.com/PCBB1917. Check it out. Really helpful for me to keep the blog moving and keep the podcast moving and hopefully hit the road a little bit with the Friars come Big East play. I'm eyeing maybe a trip out to Milwaukee, maybe a trip out to Chicago. I have some things in the works, and everyone who's over there at Patreon really helps with that. So special shout out now to JLD, John Lee Dumas, Mike Evans, my parents, Adam Nagel, Bob Allison, Ron Torbick, Brendan Ryan, Dan Marcus, Joe DeAngelis, Dennis Corbett, Mike Sayburn, Ray Penza, Dennis Burns, Alex Simeone, Chris Thurlow, G, Terry Meyer, and Alan Russ. So special thanks to all of those fine gentlemen. As I mentioned, we will have another episode next week. Also hope to have some guests in some upcoming podcasts. Also, it's possible that you'll get a one-off episode with just me and a guest, or Chris and a guest, or Brendan and a guest. So make sure you subscribe on iTunes to get the latest and greatest episode as they are released. You find them on iTunes, find them on Overcast, you find them on any podcast application that you can get your hands on. We are available there. So hopefully you head out to the Dunk this weekend on Sunday ahead of that Patriots game to see the Friars take on Stony Brook. And we'll talk to everybody next week.
Don't forget to subscribe to the Providence Friarcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts.
Follow Mike Hopkins on Twitter and Instagram
At PCBB1917. Like the Facebook page, and as always, stay classy, Friartown.